The Pacific Ocean is not a place. It is a sentient, ancient, and indifferent force. It covers more than 60 million square miles of our planet's surface, a staggering blue desert where the horizon offers no sanctuary, and the depths guard secrets that defy human logic. To the uninitiated, the ocean is a playground of waves and sun, but to those who have felt its true weight, it is a vast, silent machinery of erasure. It is a world where distance is measured in days and survival is a matter of atmospheric permission. On the morning of February 11th, 1979, on the island of Maui, that permission seemed absolute. The sun rose over the harbor with a clarity that felt like a blessing. The air was heavy with the scent of salt spray and tropical flora, and the water was a flat sapphire mirror reflecting a cloudless sky. It was the kind of morning that invited the soul to wander. 5 men, all of them locals, all of them experienced mariners who had known these waters since childhood, decided that the sea was calling. Scott Moorman, Benjamin Kalama, Peter Hanchett, James McCoy, and Ralph Malayakini were not looking for adventure. They were looking for a Saturday afternoon of peace. They boarded a 17-foot Boston whaler named the Sarah Joe. It was a sturdy, reliable vessel, famously marketed as unsinkable due to its foam-filled fiberglass hull. It was powered by a reliable outboard motor and stocked with the simple necessities of a fishing trip: rods, tackle, a cooler of cold beer, and a few extra cans of fuel. They were heading for the Alanuihaha Channel, a notoriously treacherous stretch of water between Maui and the Big Island. But today, the channel was a lake. They laughed, they shouted to friends on the pier, and they disappeared into the blue. By 10 a.m., the Sarah Joe was a tiny white speck on the horizon, moving toward the deep water where the big fish run. They had no way of knowing that they were sailing directly into a glitch in the atmosphere. Within 2 hours, the paradise of Maui vanished. A localized freak storm, a weather anomaly so sudden and violent that meteorologists still struggle to classify it, descended directly over the Alanuihaha Channel. The barometer didn't just drop. It plummeted as if the earth had lost its grip on the air. The sky transformed from a vibrant blue to a bruised, sickly purple, and then to a terrifying pitch-black darkness. The wind jumped from a gentle breeze to 60-knot gale force in minutes. The waves, once gentle swells, became jagged walls of dark, freezing water, rising 10, 15, and 20 feet into the air. Larger commercial vessels, heavy steel-hulled ships with professional crews, were caught in the chaos. Captains later reported that the sea wasn't just rough, it was boiling, a chaotic eruption of foam and fury that made navigation impossible. These large ships struggled to turn back to the safety of the harbor, their hulls groaning under the pressure of the surge. When the storm finally broke that evening, leaving a cold, eerie silence in its wake, the people of Maui began a desperate headcount. Every boat was accounted for. Every sailor had limped back to the docks, battered but alive. Every vessel was there except for one. The Sarah Joe had not returned. The small fiberglass boat and its 5 passengers had been swallowed by the storm. The search operation that followed was one of the most extensive in the history of the Hawaiian Islands. The United States Coast Guard mobilized every available resource. HC-130, Hercules long-range aircraft, spent hundreds of hours in the air, their crews scanning every square inch of the ocean from the clouds. Helicopters skimmed the whitecaps until their fuel ran dangerously low. For weeks they scoured 70,000 square miles of the North Pacific. They were looking for any sign of life, or even any sign of death. They looked for a floating life vest, a piece of white fiberglass, a floating cooler, or the telltale iridescent shimmer of an oil slick. They found absolutely nothing. It was as if a giant hand had reached down through the storm clouds and plucked the Sarah Joe from the surface of the water, leaving not a single atom of evidence behind. No SOS calls were ever recorded. No emergency flares were seen. The men had vanished in a way that felt physical, as if they had walked through a door in the sea and the door had locked behind them. Eventually, the formal search was suspended. Memorials were held on the beaches of Maui. Families wept, prayers were said, and the names of the 5 men were etched into the island's history as the ones the sea took. The world, as it always does, moved on, but the ocean was not finished with the Sarah Joe. While the families mourned, the boat was embarking on a journey that defies every law of maritime drift and human survival. For nearly a decade, the Sarah Joe became a ghost. It is a thought that haunts the mind, a small, empty vessel, bobbing in the absolute darkness of the open ocean, thousands of miles from any human soul. It crossed the international date line. It drifted through the silent, uncharted corridors of the Central Pacific. It survived typhoons that would have snapped larger ships in half. It baked under the relentless, bleaching heat of the equatorial sun for thousands of days. It was moving through a space where time behaves differently, a place we call the Vanish Point. It wasn't just drifting, it was waiting. It was a vessel carrying a message from a storm that had ended years ago. On September 10, 1988, nearly 10 years to the day since the disappearance, the silence was finally broken. A group of government biologists from the National Marine Fisheries Service arrived at a remote, uninhabited coral atoll called Taongi. In the Marshall Islands, Taongi is often referred to as the end of the world. It is a jagged, desolate ring of coral and bone-white sand, hundreds of miles from the nearest inhabited island. It is a place ignored by modern maps, a graveyard for shipwrecks and the skeletons of seabirds. As the biologists walked the deserted shoreline, they stumbled upon a sight that made their blood run cold. Resting on the sand, half buried by the shifting tides and bleached white by a decade of sun, was a small fiberglass hull. The name on the stern was still barely legible: Sarah Joe. But the boat was not the most disturbing discovery on that island. 10 yards away from the wreck, sitting atop a small, lonely dune, was a mound of stones, a grave. Beside the stone stood a simple, weathered wooden cross made of driftwood, lashed together with rusted wire. The biologists began to dig, their hands trembling in the salt-heavy air. Inside that grave, they found a human jawbone, then a skull. The remains were wrapped in small, thin pieces of unwritten paper, blank pages that were later identified as part of a Chinese funeral ritual or manuscript. Forensic experts in Hawaii eventually confirmed the unthinkable. The remains were those of Scott Moorman. The discovery didn't solve the mystery. It shattered it into 1,000 more haunting questions. First, there is the problem of the drift. Experts in oceanography and current patterns plotted the path from Maui to Taongi. For a boat of that size to drift 3,000 miles, it would have taken approximately 3 to 4 months. Yet a different team of biologists had visited Taongi only a few years prior to 1988, and they reported the island was completely empty. There was no boat. There was no grave. This means the Sarah Joe arrived much, much later than it should have. Where was the boat for the other 6 or 7 years? Was it caught in a circular current, a literal loop in the ocean's geometry? Or was it somewhere else entirely, somewhere outside of our time? Second, there is the problem of the burial. Scott Moorman was buried with ritualistic care. The grave was deep, protected from the elements by heavy stones. To dig a grave of that depth and precision in the hard coral sand of Taongi requires physical strength, tools, and hours of labor. These are things a dying, starving castaway would not have. And then there are the Chinese papers. Taongi has no fresh water, no food, no one lives there. To this day, no one can explain how a man from Hawaii ended up buried in a traditional, possibly Chinese-influenced ritual on a forbidden island. The other 4 men were never found. No other graves exist on the island. No other bones were ever recovered. Only Scott, only the cross, only the silence. The story of the Sarah Joe remains the ultimate testament to the ocean's power to rewrite the rules of existence. It tells us that there are thin spots in our world, places where a storm is not just weather, but a gateway. Did Scott Moorman survive the storm? Did he spend weeks or perhaps years in the silence of that boat watching his friends slip away into the dark until he was the last soul left? And who in the end performed the ceremony on that white sand beach? Was it a passing secret vessel that chose to stay hidden? Or was it the ocean itself, finally laying its prize to rest? We like to believe we have mapped every inch of our world. We believe that with satellites and GPS, nothing can truly vanish. But the Sarah Joe is a reminder that the great silence is still out there. It is waiting for a small boat, a clear sky, and 5 men who are ready to become a legend. The line where the sea meets the sky is not a boundary. It is a vanish point, and some who cross it bring back stories that we are not yet ready to hear. This mystery continues to haunt the families and the researchers who have touched it. It is a story of 5 lives interrupted by a force that logic cannot contain. When we look at the wreckage of the Sarah Joe today, we don't just see a broken boat. We see a bridge between the known and the unknowable. We see a man who traveled 3,000 miles through the heart of a nightmare only to find a final, quiet resting place at the edge of the world. It is a reminder that the ocean does not just take, it moves. It reshapes reality. It takes a Saturday fishing trip and turns it into a decade-long odyssey through the void. As we close this chapter of Vanish Point, remember that the world is much larger than the maps suggest. There are spaces between the coordinates, and there are silences that can never be filled. The Pacific is still out there whispering, holding the remaining 4 names in its cold blue grip. And until those names are returned to the land, the story of the Sarah Joe will never truly be over. It remains a ghost ship in our minds, forever drifting, forever silent, forever unresolved. This is Vanish Point. Do not let the silence take you. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember that sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't being lost. It's being found in a place where you were never meant to be.